Okay, so the other day I had done a couple of gigs on the weekend, and I've been feeling kind of recently that I'm not really enjoying much of my playing when I'm playing live, and I'm just feeling like it just doesn't sound necessarily like I'd hope it would. It's not like as tidy as I'd want, or the ideas are kind of just sounding a little bit stale to me. And I guess this is probably fairly common for maybe some of us, or maybe some of us also love our own playing so much that it never happens. I don't know. That's not me anyway. So one of the things that I like to do when this sort of thing happens is play over stuff that I really like, and also listen to stuff that I really like, and kind of listen to what the guitar player is doing. And in this case, I put on some Katana Waza airs. Then I started to think about like what is it that is different about what pros are doing that we hear on the records than what potentially ourselves are doing. So that's kind of what I wanted to do a video about. This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. And one of the things to bear in mind is that I think in my head when I was growing up, the idea of what it might be like to play guitar in a studio was actually quite a lot different to maybe what it really is. Now, I imagined that studio recording went something like you get in a studio with your band and it's high pressure because you're recording together and, you know, you're hoping to come up with something on the spot which is going to sound incredible and that goes onto record. Actually, a lot more like what actually playing live is like. Reality of session playing and recording in the studio is actually, it's probably more likely than not, particularly when it comes down to guitar solos, just you sat in a control room with an engineer. I think that is probably what it's been mostly, right? Like if you look at Steve Lukather recording, if you look at, you know, any of the greats, as much as we've got footage of that sort of stuff, I think that's how it works. And that's fair enough. I think what we can take from that is that actually recording in a studio might be a little bit closer to the kind of Instagram trying to search for perfection thing that we've been told and trying to get away from, you know, where you're getting the perfect take. I think actually, you know, things like Mateus Asato has talked about recording all day, trying to get the perfect take, that might actually be a little bit closer to the recording studio experience than we thought when we were maybe younger. And also, I think Dan Huff has talked about this Man I Feel Like a Woman Shania Twain session where basically recording that particular song took like all day trying to get that groove right. So yeah, it's a whole thing. Like it's not necessarily, you're probably not hearing necessarily first takes on quite a lot of stuff, and even things that are thought to be first takes, like for instance Eddie Van Halen's Beat It. My buddy David Beebe thinks he can hear at least one splice in there. So take it all with a pinch of salt. Like if it's in the studio, there's potentially quite a lot of not manipulation or anything like that, but piecing things together, potentially having lots of takes. Is not necessarily as time pressured, or you know everything has to be perfect on a first take thing. As well, Tom Bukovac has talked about this, like his first take he kind of calls his trash take or something like that, where he makes a lot of mistakes, and that's kind of just an interesting thought. So perfection on your first go, don't necessarily consider that to be the thing. Now this was actually my first take recording over it. I did record here, so I'll show you that. I've been listening in particular to country radio quite a lot in the car, smooth country radio, and I think there's quite a lot of guitar solos that you hear. This is one place where you can still hear quite a lot of guitar solos. I think a lot of this stuff is recorded in Nashville, and for that reason, maybe is why A, guitar players, there seem to be plentiful in Nashville, but B, because there are these guitar players and great guitar players, perhaps that's why, you know, they cut out these small sections of songs where it's like, let's put a guitar solo here. Now, one of the things that I hear people talk about a lot is a great guitar solo should tell a story. There's quite a lot of guitar solos that I'm hearing on country radio which are, to my mind, just maybe filling a bit of a gap. I think of maybe, I shouldn't really name any songs here, should I? But there's been a couple where I thought, like, that's just two notes. And that might be okay sometimes, but it's not necessarily, in my opinion, doing as much as it could be. Like, what I hope a solo does when I think of great solos is that actually that becomes potentially your favourite moment of the song. I think of Carlos Rios on Dancing on the Ceiling. I think of Richie Blackmore, I think it is, on Living on a Prayer. I can think of, you know, lots of moments where even though the solo is very short, and that's something we'll come on to in a minute, it really does lift the song somewhere else, not just fill like an 8-16 bar gap. By the way, if you're interested in like getting better as a player, I think TrueFire has some really interesting courses from some of your favourite players and mine, Andy Timmons, you know, Larry Carlton's got some stuff on there, Robin Ford, some of the people that have played on my favourite records, Eric Johnson. You can use the code JNC40 to get 40% off of that. Or if you want to dip in and out of all of the courses for the entire year, you can use the All Access Pass. Now, if you use the code JNC100, you can get $100 off of that. But I think if you're interested in kind of getting some insight in this stuff, there's also some stuff on there from John Oates and Guthrie Trapp about playing, you know, as two acoustic players. That's really interesting stuff as well. And masterclasses from loads of amazing players on there. So check that out. JNC40 for 40% off of any individual course. JNC100 for $100 off of the All Access Pass. Now, here's the thing that I think you should be trying to do, and Julian Lage did talk about this on his podcast with Rhett, the Dipped in Tone podcast, which was if he was trying to get better at improvising solos or even writing solos, play along with the other soloist as they're playing. And I think this is something I used to do a bit as a kid. There's no need to do it as much these days because you can find backing tracks or make your own or use various apps to remove guitar parts. But I think it's quite a good idea to listen to parts that you really like or players that you really like and try and replicate exactly what they're doing. So for instance, at the end of this solo, there was that moment that stuck out to me that was like... So I decided, right, I'll figure that part out and I'll play that the same each time. And likewise, if there was a particular moment in a solo that I thought that really stands out to me as being super, like, high quality musical, sounds super pro, I would potentially try and write a solo around that moment or improvise a solo, but keep one aspect of it the same each time. And that could be a way that you can get something out of someone else's solo, but also inject a bit of yourself into there. Coming on to this idea about the length of a solo, this idea of telling a story, I've done a video on this before, I think it's a little bit overplayed unless it's a very, very short story. What we hear in a lot of like country records, pop records in general, is that a guitar solo could be 16 seconds long at a push, and that is not really enough time to do these things that we hear so much about. Like, it's the notes that you don't play. It's an interesting thought, and particularly if you're doing like a longer improvisation over a moment, then that's really cool. And definitely when you're building a solo in those cases, I think it is important to bear in mind that you might have a longer amount of time to fill. Actually, if you're playing on a record, 8 to 16 bars is really not a long time at all. And certainly it gives you a totally different perspective than kind of just playing over a 4-minute backing track. So I would encourage you to give this a try, and maybe that might be the thing that you notice that is different about most of these solos that you hear. They don't sound meandering and all that sort of stuff because they are simply not. They are simply quite short solos in the main. Unless you're listening to kind of prog records or instrumental guitar music, that is kind of the one place where you can get these really long solos. Like, I don't know, Liquid Tension Experiment, what is it, Paradigm Shift, where you've got this long solo over a long amount of time. Or, you know, a lot of Steve Vai stuff where it's essentially like a through composed solo the whole way through. I think in terms of solos that you, your dad, your mum might know that might be able to sing to you are probably like shorter snippets of songs. So give that a try. Another thing to bear in mind on these records and stuff like that is, you know, tuning and timing being quite important, as well as maybe not racing through the whole way through the solo. Now, for me personally, I kind of like to do a fast run here and there. I do get people occasionally comment saying like that what they like about what I do is that I'm not just playing fast all the time, although I kind of think of myself as playing too fast some of the time. But for sure, like thinking about, right, I want to build to a sustained bend. And certainly on the records that I hear, you're hearing things that sound a lot like a guitar. So what I mean by that is things that are guitaristic, you know, whether that might be bends. You know, whatever it might be, but the thing that makes your guitar sound like a guitar, those seem to be little bits of things that kind of do stick out in solos. And it's quite a lot of pentatonic kind of noodly stuff that I hear as well. You know, this sort of stuff, it is the sort of stuff that does end up on records as it happens. Some of it might not sound super inspiring, but again, some of these solos are maybe just there to sort of like fill a bit of time. So yeah, don't lose too much heart if you don't sound like your favourite players all the time. But it was just something that occurred to me that we should, again, I say again, try soloing over these little snippets of songs that actual solos happen on and see what you can come up with. I think it's a really interesting, different way of approaching playing guitar rather than just playing through a whole song, rather than playing for 7 minutes over the same loop of a backing track. Take 16 seconds or 30 seconds, that moment of a song that you think is a masterpiece, and see what you can come up with over that little snippet of time, and give yourself some license to have a go at that. I think it's a really, really interesting approach to some of this stuff, and certainly not a common thing that I hear people talk about. And I think it's actually a lot closer to what recording in a studio with as a professional musician might be. You're given like this small window of music at a time. You know, you're not recording all the way through a song in one take most of the time. You'll kind of be doing, right, well, this is the verse section. You might copy and paste that over. This is the chorus. You might copy and paste that over. Okay, we got this moment here, this 16 seconds. Can we try some solo options here? And you might get the option, you know, let's do 5-6 takes and see what we come up with. Give that a try as part of your kind of practice session. I think it could be really beneficial. Tom Bukovac also talked in a recording, in a video about this, where he was talking about like you can't have too much of an ego in this moment. And sometimes the first idea that you have might not be the right guy. He talks about like having a few guys that you could bring to the party. Like this guy might not be the energy that the other guy in the room was feeling for the song. So you need to then think, right, well, I'll just forget that and that's okay. It's probably recorded to tape already anyway, and their mind might change when they go back and listen to it. But just kind of keep it out of your mind and try and give it another go, try another take. For me, when I'm recording this stuff, I'm listening closely to a snare drum or a click. And Tom Bukovac also said, and I'll do another video about this at some other time, about having yourself lower in the mix so you can hear more of what's going on. And yeah, it doesn't also feel quite as exposed, and you might play a little bit more like you're playing in the band. Some thoughts for you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'll catch you in another video soon. I'll put this backing track actually up on Patreon. I don't know if you guys can figure out what the song was, but it is kind of country and that, you know, leave some comments if you can get what that song is. Cheers for stopping by. Oh, and I was using the Helix preset Marshall 2203 more, and I thought it sounded pretty good. Cheers.